ISPS Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. We acknowledge Aboriginal sovereignty has never been ceded. We acknowledge the gravity of the work needed to be done to undo the continuing impacts of colonisation committed in these lands. May we continue to work for the flourishing of all. May we continue to learn our history. May we continue to care for country and each other. And I invite everyone to put into the chat the name of the traditional owners of the lands from where you're coming from tonight. Thank you all so much. And I'll pass you on to Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda. Yes, you're seeing two Amandas. We are ISPS Australia board directors, and like to acknowledge our other board directors that are here with us tonight, and in particular any members that are also here with us. So we have Tara Coppins, Amit Banerjee, and Begonia Ward. And we have all the way from Massachusetts, we have our international speaker, Oryx Cohen. Hi, Oryx. So I'd like to just start by saying that ISPS Australia, for those that don't know us, we're a small organisation here, but we're linked to the much broader International Society for Psychological and Social Approaches to Psychosis. And we're all, there's chapters all over the world. The organisation started in the 50s in Switzerland. And it's just really exciting to be here with our objectives of promoting psychological and social approaches to psychosis. And that's pretty much what we do in various ways. And if you're not a member, we encourage you to check out our website and to also consider joining us, because together we're stronger. ISPS is not against the use of antipsychotic medication. We recognise that small amounts over small periods of time can actually be helpful. As board directors, we all have varying different perspectives, and what you're going to hear tonight in our discussions will be will be coming from our own opinions. And we're really keen to hear your opinions and your experiences as well, which we'll open up to. I'd like to acknowledge, as a person of lived experience of psychosis, extreme states, that I stand on the shoulders of giants within a movement, a world movement of people that have had these experiences and have not been responded to in ways that have been helpful to them. And I just want to us all to sort of center ourselves in that, thinking about that some people who aren't here tonight maybe they could have been here had circumstances not been what they are for them. So we still have a lot of work to do. I also want to acknowledge the and just think about the family members, the carers, the people that support people in extreme states. We know that that's not always easy, and we really want to acknowledge you. And then also the amazing workers, clinicians, people out there who are doing their best to respond in ways that are helpful within the context of their work environments. We acknowledge you as well, and we know that together as a collective, we can be stronger and make a difference. Thank you. I'd like to hand over to our MC tonight, Tara.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everybody, especially Oryx, who is our guest star for the evening. So, going to start with some brief introductions of the presenters today. So, we'll start with myself, and then I'll hand over to Armin and then Oryx. So, as Amanda said, my name is Tara Coppins. I've been board member of ISPS IU since 2021, and by background training, I'm a clinical psychologist. At the moment, I'm currently working within a rehab inpatient setting here in Adelaide that is roughly akin to a secure extended care unit. But I've also had the absolute pleasure of working not only with people who've experienced extreme states over a longer period of time, but also the potentially beginning of experiencing symptoms and experiences within the ultra high risk category or the first episode psychosis category. So I'm incredibly excited to be here today attending with you all. And I'd like to introduce Amit. I'd like to ask Amit to introduce himself now.
Thank you, Tara. I'm a psychiatrist. I have been practicing in Australia since '97. I did my training in India in a town called Ranchi, which is a couple of large asylums. In fact, anyway, the first report of Indian hemp psychosis came out from Ranchi in 1930, just as a bit of trivia. I mean, I have a bit of a critical psychiatry background. I mean, I've been searching long and hard for the truth, and I think critical psychiatry principles kind of, I think, I identify with them the best. I have heard a little, well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I have been on the board of ISPS since the beginning of this year. I do understand that there are various paradigms to understand psychosis, and I fully respect them. Obviously, we should have a dialogue. And I do not, I mean, least restrictive principles of treatment are very dear to me. I'm working in an early psychosis team now since 2020, 0.6 FTE, as they call it, full-time equivalent, and I do a bit of private work in outer suburban Perth. The early psychosis work obviously involves managing early psychosis for a lot of young people. I look forward to an interesting discussion today.
Yes, and we're definitely looking forward to your knowledge and your expertise in this particular field as well. So now I'll hand over to Oryx to provide a brief introduction and then invite you to commence with the presentation for tonight.
Okay, thank you so much. So I believe I have about 20 minutes to present. So I wanted to first thank ISPS Australia. ISPS is an organization dear to my heart. I think one of the best organizations around. So it's a pleasure to be here, even though it's quite early for me. So I am waking up, so please forgive me and let me go through my process of waking up, and hopefully I'll get on a roll here. So I want to thank you all, and definitely Amanda Haberman for inviting me to come. So it's a very important topic, and a topic that's dear to my heart. So I'm going to do about 10 minutes of my own personal story, and then 10 minutes of some research. So with the research, you're going to get generalizations, right? What that research has said about groups of people, but not necessarily in detail about any of those individual people's stories. So for the next 10 minutes or so, you'll get a very individual story. So my story does not represent necessarily everybody's story, but you can get kind of more in depth when you hear about someone's personal story. So if we start with early psychosis, right? What are we talking about? What is psychosis? Personally, I don't really like that term, psychosis. It's a medical term. The way that I look at my experience that makes the most sense for me is as a vision quest. So I really kind of respect those cultures and are drawn to those cultures that their paradigm is that the experiences like that are vision quests, and can be the most important experiences in someone's life. They tend to happen as someone is coming of age, right? You know, formative years, 16 to 26, it is the most common time for this, you know, quote unquote, first episode. And in a lot of cultures, this is looked at as very normal, and actually an important part of someone's development moving from a child to adulthood. So I think this is very important, because the way that we as a culture frame the experience affects outcomes. So in cultures where you have this belief that if someone is going through what we look at as psychosis, they may look at as a vision quest. Another term that I like is altered state or extreme states. Instead of looking at that person and their culture and saying that person is a sick person, right? There's a problem. They are mentally ill for the rest of their lives. You know, they need treatment, they need drugs. And this is not going to be a fixable situation. This person is mentally ill, and this is just a sign that, you know, it was there, it was underlying, and now they've broken out into this full-blown psychosis and they're a sick person. So that's the way Western culture looks at these experiences. These other cultures look at it as, wow, there's something important going on here in this person's life. We need to embrace this person. We have healers in the community, shamans that have been through their own similar experience, and we need to get them connected with the healers in our community to explore this vision quest, to find the meaning in it. And when a person is approached in that way, they get through it. For the most part, they get through the experience, and it does become that meaningful experience. They're not necessarily put on, you know, medication or drugs, and they're re-invited into society, not as a sick person, but as a person who just had maybe the most meaningful experience in their life. So, but I was not brought up in one of those cultures. I was brought up in Western culture. So when I first went through my experience when I was 26, it did feel, all those things felt very meaningful, beautiful at first. You know, I was going through a stressful time with a move across the country and not knowing anybody, and but I was having a great time as well, meeting new friends, and didn't end up sleeping a whole lot, and had some stressful experiences happen. But overall, it was a beautiful experience at the beginning, a feeling of oneness, um, just all this beauty around me, seeing beauty in other people. What's wrong with that, right? What's wrong with that? Well, it worries people in our society. Oh, your personality is totally changed. Like, there's something wrong. There's something going on. We have to do something. We don't know what to do. We'd love to just join you in your bliss right now. But we've been taught in our culture that there's something seriously wrong. So then you get it in your own mind. Oh man, there's got to be something wrong. What's going on? And then that builds on each other, on itself. So rather than being connected with a supportive community, knowledgeable of these states, hopeful that you're going to get through it okay and you're going to learn something from it, now I'm in a society that's, uh-oh, this is a sign of psychosis. You're in trouble. You need to go to the doctor. You need to get, probably medicated. And so that is the impact that a society can have on you. It definitely had a big impact on me, because I'm like, oh, maybe this isn't so great. What's going on? But my reaction actually was like the other way. It was like, there's something wrong with you to tell me that what I'm going through is not meaningful. And I'm kind of happy I had that reaction, but it didn't. It led to a lot of arguments, and anyway, arguing with psychiatrists and things like that. But and then ended up being more forcibly medicated. So all of this led up to a more extreme altered state, which I think could have been avoided with a more supportive community, where I crashed my car. It was very dramatic. I ended up and that's how I ended up in a hospital for physical injuries. Luckily, no one else was hurt. And I was there for physical injuries, but then I got transferred to the psych unit. And that's where my journey on medications began, because there's no way I was going to get out of that hospital without being put on some sort of medication. So since that time, I've had 3 similar experiences. The last one was 2013, so been about 11 years. I do think there is a place for medication. And in my life, it looks like sometimes it's helpful for me to be able to sleep and get rest. Definitely lack of sleep has been associated with having more difficulty controlling your mind states. So, but this notion of you have a chemical imbalance and this drug is fixing that imbalance and you need to be on that drug for the rest of your life, there's a lot of problems with that model. I'm more for drugs can be useful at times. It's not fixing a chemical imbalance. It might serve a specific purpose, like trying to get sleep or making the experience a little less intense, that your altered state is a little less intense. So I think my personal opinion is we need to move from medication as the standard of care, to a tool, just like any other tool that we use for our mental health. And now I am going to bring up some research that supports this notion. All right, super exciting. So, share my screen. Can everybody see this okay? Can I get a thumbs up?
Yes.
Yes, you can see it. Great. All right. I'm gonna go into slideshow mode. Early psychosis to medicate or not. By the way, I am the CEO for the National Empowerment Center. We are a peer-run national organization in the US. All of us have our own lived experience. And I believe I saw Maureen on the, Maureen woke up early to be here. So thanks, Maureen. She's a coworker of mine at NEC. I'm not sure if anybody else made it, but this is being recorded. So for folks who can't be here. All right. So let's get to the evidence for this different model. So I'm first going to talk about open dialogue. And since the early 1980s, open dialogue has been the mental health system in Western Lapland, Finland. So you go through first episode, quote unquote, psychosis, you get open dialogue. This is what you get. So, and open dialogue views, quote unquote, psychosis as happening in the space between relationships rather than residing in the individual, not just in my head. It's like I talked about, everybody interacting with me had a role in what that experience looked like. So it's in the space between relationships. So what they do with open dialogue is they bring in everybody involved with that experience. And it's not just, oh, there's something wrong with the person who's going through something. It's let's talk to family, let's talk to friends who are part of that situation, and in a circle, and everybody's equal, and we're going to work on this together rather than it being an individual problem. So this mode has been well researched. Open dialogue has been well researched. 80% success rate of avoiding hospital, medication, and achieving full recovery at 5-year follow-up. Wow. Wow. Why don't we do this everywhere? The number of people diagnosed with schizophrenia has almost disappeared. It's almost disappeared in this area of the world. It went from 33 out of 100,000 to 2 out of 100,000. Now, this is not because people stopped having problems. This is because with this intervention, people did not have the criteria and the DSM and have the quote unquote symptoms for long enough to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, right? So that's really pretty cool. This is lowering the number of diagnoses of schizophrenia. Amazing, right? This is the area in Finland, Tornio, that blue box up there, Tornio. So this is the mental health system in this part of the world. Kind of wish I was there when I went through what I went through. So we are starting to offer some in the US. There's a training center in Massachusetts. There's open dialogue scattered around the world at this point. Okay, let's talk about soteria houses. Many of you probably heard of soteria houses and Lauren Mosher. This is another well-researched intervention in the 1970s developed by Dr. Lauren Mosher. So it was an experimental design. How do folks do in a non-professional house, very limited medication, versus the traditional hospital with psychiatrists and clinicians and lots of medication, geared toward what we're talking about, these first break psychoses. Longer term stays happen at soteria houses. This was well researched with fantastic results compared to psychiatric hospitals. Currently, we have soteria houses scattered around the world. So here are some of the results. This is random assignment studies, and clients report that 85 to 90% of acute and long-term clients deemed in need of acute hospitalization can be returned to the community without use of conventional hospital treatment. 85 to 90%. Designed as a drug-free environment, soteria was as successful as antipsychotic drug treatment in reducing psychotic symptoms in 6 weeks. At 2 years post-admission, soteria treated subjects were working at a significantly higher occupational levels, were significantly more living independently or with peers, and had fewer readmissions. So lots of good evidence for this model, like amazing evidence. The Vermont story, you may have heard of this, Dr. Courtney Harding, 30-year long-term study. This was a planned deinstitutionalization project in the 1950s with community supports in place. That's important. So not just releasing people to the streets, but having community supports in place. Again, 30 years, amazing study. What this found was, and by the way, this is not first episode. So this is, I get the focus on first episode because you have a lot of more, chance for a lot more success because they haven't been institutionalized for so long. This study proved that even with institutionalized back ward psychiatric patients who have been given up on by society, this model can have success. So 1/2 to 2/3 of the former back ward patients made significant recoveries. 1/3 had quote unquote completely recovered. The common factor in these 1/3 was there's absolutely no medication. No medication. And these are people who have been on medications for their whole lives. It's pretty amazing. So the last one, and I might run over a couple of minutes, I think this is important. The WHO studies. Many of you probably heard of the WHO studies. So this is World Health Organization. Now, the World Health Organization embarked on this project in the 1970s to basically try to prove that the Western model of psychiatry should be globalized. The globalization of mental health. Because why? Our Western culture, we're so advanced. Our science is better. We have to teach these third world countries like India, Nigeria, Colombia, the right way to do things. And we have these fantastic medications in the West, and this needs to be globalized. Now, guess what? Pharmaceutical companies, big time behind this, right? Let's get our drugs into these poor countries where they don't have access to our wonderful drugs. So that was basically the goal of the study. They wanted to prove that Western medicine is where it's at. So they compared patients diagnosed with schizophrenia in the US versus third world countries like India, Nigeria, and Colombia. But what they actually found was that 2/3 of the patients made complete recoveries in these third world countries versus 1/3 in the US. So they found the opposite of what they were hoping to find. And 16% of the patients in these third world countries took medications versus 61% in developed countries, leading the researchers to say that growing up in a developed country is a strong predictor that you will not recover from schizophrenia. That was a quote of the study. Now, they did not like the results they got of this study. So there must have been something wrong with the design. Let's tweak some things. They did it again. So this was results they found in 1979. They did this long-term study again. They got the exact same results again. So, and ending with this quote, the finding of a better outcome of patients in developing countries was confirmed. So, let's see, where are we at? We got resources. Contact us. So why don't you hear more about these studies? Why don't everybody know about Soteria, Open Dialogue, Vermont, the WHO studies? Those studies don't get published in the corporate-owned media. It's a big one. Who owns the media? People with money. Who has the money? Pharmaceutical industry is one that has a lot of it. So there are political reasons why people don't know this information. So I'm happy to share it. Sometimes the truth can be a little bit hard to take if you haven't seen some of this stuff, because it is a bit disturbing. But I highly recommend this book, Mad in America by Robert Whitaker. That really opened my eyes to some of this stuff. So anyways, I went over, but apologize. Hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Oryx, and absolutely no need to apologise. We can absolutely make account for a couple of extra minutes. So thank you for sharing your experience within the treatment and the mental health system, and for also highlighting some research or approaches that aren't necessarily the types of approaches that are getting taught in more formal institutions like universities or through courses and other studies. The thing that I felt most interested in is the concept of cultural interpretation or cultural meaning, and how this gives significance or importance or explanation as to what it is the individual is experiencing and going through. But not only that, the other end of it as well. What kinds of supports are going to be vital for this person to have a less restrictive experience of being involved in treatment or mental health systems, but also really highlights the idea of collaborative practice. And I was having a think about whether I've come across the concept of a Soteria house before, and I'm pretty certain that in South Australia or in Adelaide, where I'm based, the nearest thing I could think of to that type of model is actually a clinically based model with clinically trained staff that provide 24/7 support within the context of not quite hospital, but not quite home. It's almost a in-between an intermediate care centre. So I'm particularly interested in going away and doing a bit more research on access to Soteria houses across Australia. So thank you for raising that to my attention. I wanted to invite you to have any comments or reflections on Oryx's presentation.
Well, thanks, Oryx. Yeah, a very powerful presentation, and raises a lot of complex sort of questions. I mean, if I may be, how can I say, like, obviously, I don't want to use fuzzy language to mask what I want to say, and I hope no one will doubt my absolutely steadfast intention to be, discuss things with respect. The reality is that conventional mental health services, let's say in Australia, which is possibly modeled along the lines of what services were developed in the UK, its public mental health services are in constant crisis. I mean, we keep hearing about the NHS and mental health, and just today, Wednesday is between 4 and 5 here. That is, an hour before this session started. The clinical director of the HEP program said there are about 24 people in EDs, sort of involuntary, waiting for beds. And I have left the state mental health services. I left that in 2020. The Headspace Early Psychosis program that I'm employed, like, this is run by an NGO. I mean, Trina here knows the ins and outs of it. Like, there are 2 NGOs running this program, with 3 centers in the north of Perth, and the money comes from the federal government. So we don't have links with the state government, who are the main of Western Australia, who are the main providers of mental health care. But this is the kind of crisis that is there all the time. And I have, over the year, I'll continuously, always, every day, I'm thinking, how can things be better? And I have my conclusion, my opinion is that it boils down to this risk management business that psychiatrists have taken on behalf of society. Society wants psychiatrists to be these risk managers. There is inadequate examination of what is risk, and it is always, it is easier to be safe than sorry. And then once in a while, there are horror stories in the media of someone who has done something terrible, and basically everyone then becomes more cautious. The legal system does not allow you to take many risks. And because we are in a privileged, I acknowledge that psychiatrists are in sort of this paradigm, the mainstream paradigm. Psychiatrists are have a privileged position, and then when things go wrong, then the norms and the laws that are brought down on them are pretty harsh too. So and then there's scapegoating, and there is like, who is bothered about the primary risk to the individual? Is it all about the secondary risk to the organization, reputational risk, et cetera, and the media has has, has a real role to play in that. But when before I joined, well, I've been a paying member of ISPS for some time, but I think last year I contacted the international arm, and I had a young person here who I was sort of struggling with about his diagnosis. I mean, I still don't believe that it's, we have to say things like psychosis and schizophrenia and stuff like that, or just we are a part of this paradigm. If we don't, I mean, our service is named early psychosis, right? So yeah, I was kind of asking for an opinion, and I mean, a gentleman by the name of Bruce Kohler, I think, from New York, he responded, and he sent me a long email about how ISPS has made a representation to WHO about dropping the term schizophrenia, and he had well laid arguments about that. But the main issue is that, I mean, everyone in this space needs to talk respectfully to each other, and one of the problems I have with mainstream is that they don't. I mean, there is a fair bit of emphasis on lived experience at present, but sometimes it is relegated to tokenism, and I don't think a genuine conversation takes place. But I don't know, I'm taking a lot of time, but I thought we were 6 minutes early, Tara, so I thought Oryx finished early. Anyway, because he didn't introduce himself. See, I mean, he went into his talk straight away. But we know, I mean, we've read his bio. So the issue about developing countries and better prognosis and cultures, I will make this comment that what I understood as culture and different cultures has changed remarkably from even the time that I have been in Australia. I'm a social and cultural, but social and critical. I do, my bio says social and critical psychiatry, and I do see critical psychiatry as a bit of a a bit of an, a subdivision of social psychiatry, really. I mean, the culture, the culture is changing very rapidly. Like, lots of things like norms are developed in popular culture, in mainstream society. And I have also, because of my background, I always used to think that, there's a dominant culture and there's minority culture, and, I have to fit in with the dominant culture, and, I have to adopt the norms. And when norms are codified, they become law. That's the way I look at it, So, but culture's changing quite rapidly. We are in this global world. Traditional cultures are not what they used to be, even when I was back in India training. If you want to explain some of the better prognosis, it is basically because of family support and people sort of, rallying around the person who has had the illness. And I'll be honest here. I mean, I used to work in this asylum where people would be brought in from hundreds of kilometers away, 600, 700 kilometers in chains, in shackles, and rural people, cannabis was very prevalent. I have to say that those people would not have the sophistication to understand open dialogue. So there was no option but to treat them. But I totally agree. If anyone says that medication has to be at a minimum, there could be episodes of illness, and as illness is a social construct. Illness has a social construct. You might be psychotic, and still there could be debate I mean, I know I'm sorry to use the word psychotic, but there could be debate about what kind of illness that is, right? And the whole push to, I mean, I've read your little story. I was reading it today about how quickly you were put on 2 grams of sodium valproate. And when your initial episode happened in 2003. And that is the kind of thing that really needs to stop. But I can tell you, even today in my consultants meeting, I was kind of I'm not chastised often, but kind of the implication was that I let go of someone a bit early after 6 months of observation without medication. And I was told that the guidelines are that we should have followed him up for a year. I mean, and but these kind of things keep happening. I think the need for dialogue is really important. How do we create this movement? I mean, how do we alter the behavior of mainstream practices? And then we have the issue of families and carers when someone is not well or a risk, which is genuine. And I don't have a very good answer to that one. I think risk is reduced by respectful engagement, but to be true, sometimes people really do not want to engage. So what do you do then? So these are really tricky questions. I shall stop now.
Thank you, Amit. And yeah, it is incredibly difficult to hold a position or a belief or want to follow an approach that isn't necessarily sanctioned or indicated by the society or even the organisation within which we are working and based. So there's a real challenge there to hold a different space or a different opinion, absolutely. So, Oryx, I wanted to ask you a question about your thoughts and your opinion about the role of talking-based therapy in working with extreme states, and to extend that question and ask whether you think from either your own personal opinion or from what you've observed of others, whether you have a belief that a combination of talk-based therapy and medication is helpful in terms of reducing the sense of disruption to the person's life. Yeah, whether you have any opinions on the role of psychology and talk-based therapy.
Sure. Well, I think both talk-based therapy and the whole medication system is a result of a professionalization of mental health. So I think we have to be honest about that there are people making a lot of money, their livelihood, their careers off of other people's suffering. And that's not to say that medication at times, as I mentioned before, can be helpful. Lots of people get a lot out of talk therapy as well. They, some people say their therapist saved their life. So there's definitely a place for it. But I also think, we have to look at it honestly and realistically, and these are paid relationships for the most part, and the downside of talk therapy, a lot of talk therapy, is again, one person is an expert, right? and has power over the person that they are with, basically directing the person on how they think they should live their life. So I mean, and therapists are human beings, so the diversity in therapists is extreme. I've heard really amazing stories about therapy, and people really, I've had some good experiences in therapy with open dialogue therapy, actually. And I've heard horror stories about therapy. So it's a lot of it's based on who that therapist is and what perspective they come from. And so I will say that therapy and medication, in my mind, are two options. So the professional world and the research world will look at it, hey, there is medication and there's therapy, and that's it. There are two options. Some work, well for some, don't work well for others. There are a lot of other options. So there's a whole menu of options that people can turn to. One is peer support. That's what my organization does. We're all about peer support. Ideally, there's no power dynamic. There's nobody telling you what to do, but you're with someone who has a similar experience, and may be able to support you because they've gone through something similar. Find that people feel much more empowered that way, and possibly their recoveries are more sustainable when the solutions come from themselves rather than somebody else who's telling them what to do. In the US and probably in Australia, we have this revolving door. Why do we have a revolving door? People go into the hospital, they get out, they do their therapy, they do their medication, but they have the same issue and they go back into the hospital. It could be part of that is the solutions are not coming from themselves. The solutions are coming from all these professionals telling them what to do. So what we find with peer support is that people find their own solutions. And I'd like to put a plug in for our major training, which is emotional CPR. Anybody can learn emotional CPR. Professionals can learn emotional CPR and maybe practice a little bit differently too. But emotional CPR is not a top-down approach. Emotional CPR is a connected approach, and it really leads to the person in crisis being able to find what works for them. Having fantastic results, and now emotional CPR is evidence-based. Gotta be evidence-based. We're researched. We actually have a book out, so we're like official. We have a paperback book about emotional CPR. So that would be an approach that, again, another option. So now we have therapy, medication. Hey, how about peer support? How about emotional CPR? How about exercise? How about nutrition? How about getting enough sleep? How about taking walks? How about listening to music? So there are so many things people can do for their mental health beyond therapy and medication. So that's my 2 cents. Which those two things can be helpful as well, but they're not the only thing.
Understood. We're all speaking with a lot of caveats with our opinions this evening, and absolutely, I think the current approach of it's option A or option B, it's black or white. How about we think about what else there is in the middle? How can we support individuals to explore the options within the grey, or the between the two states. And I was wondering if there's any particular question you would like to ask Oryx.
No, I don't have any particular questions as such, but I was I sort of lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. About sort of about like I think the globalization issue that Oryx mentioned, societal issues, cultural issues, let's say related to substances, substance use. Okay, now it's not talked enough. I think any discussion about mental health really should start from like what is good mental health, and how do you sort of preserve that. If every young person I see or any person I see, I mean, I don't know, my style is a bit, I mean, I'm definitely not a very medically oriented psychiatrist. I mean, to use medication because, well, that's not, I'm not talking about the psychotic person, but not who's got has had a psychotic episode. But in private, it's just sort of it's people who are basically well, and it's a tragedy that a fair bit of resources go into that. But people's perception of distress is subjective, and they come in with particular requirements, and then they have to be at least assessed. It is this when we talk about the system, and Oryx mentioned issues around payment, professional. I don't know that we can get rid of professionals. I don't think we can. I'm just being realistic. In an ideal world, maybe yes, but that's how the whole system survives. I mean, the critical position is that if we are not talking about psychosis just yet, just at this time, but maybe we are to a certain extent, where the labeling and the identification of mental health problems is a way of the free market economy and capitalist societies to absolve themselves from correcting the ills that are present. And that's something that that's too big a problem for us to manage. But I think the discussion around mental health and good mental health and the management of psychosis extreme states should start with some degree of philosophical examination of what it means to be human. I mean, Joanna Moncrief, quite a prominent critical psychiatrist, in 2014 wrote an article about the marketing of the new bipolar disorder. And there's a quote in that article saying that the Western societies have, like, these, by medicalizing these ups and downs, they've forgotten what it means to be human. And that's a core issue. And we need to bring that discussion back. I mean, it is not very fashionable to talk like this, because people are owning their diagnosis. I mean, I'm very concerned about the expansion of, let's say, ASD, neurodiversity. I find people owning that label and then attributing things to that label, where, ADHD, if you go onto a web list or attitude or something, every little symptom can be attributed to ADHD now. But that's just how it has happened. So we should possibly start with an examination of what is normal.
I think, that's great. I agree. So I wanted to say something about community, because I think this is really important. And if we look at some of this research, some of the answers, clues might be in the sense of community. So what happens in Western culture when someone is diagnosed? Usually they are taken away from their community. They are taken away from their family, their friends, their job. They are put in oftentimes in a locked facility, and now their community becomes the professionals. The community becomes the therapist, the psychiatrist, um, and and uh, and the families are told this is in the best interest of the person being helped. There's nothing more you can do. They have a mental illness. They need only the help that we can give them. So, but I think if we look at some of the research that I mentioned, and we think about, well, how did people actually make recoveries? Same diagnoses, same doctors diagnosing these people. I think it has a lot to do with community. So, in a country like India, Nigeria, or Colombia, they said in follow-up, they would have sometimes difficulty finding the person because the person was so reintegrated into their community. They were working, they were, with family. It's like not what's happening in the US. Easily findable. They're probably still in the hospital. So it's just something to think about, and I think it's a really important way that we get better. Like, it's been my part of my story is not being separated for too long from my family. I'm married, I have 2 kids. Not being separated for too long, not being out of work for too long. I'm lucky enough to work as a peer worker in mental health, and in that community. Luckily, my boss at that time and my coworkers totally embraced me back at work. It doesn't happen for everyone. You could lose your job, right? In a lot of situations, you could lose your job. So there's another part of your community that you lost. So you lose your family, you lose your job. And then you're expected to make a recovery based on therapy and drugs when you've lost everything that has meaning to you in your life. Oh, is that realistic? To expect people to make those recoveries? Or should we be focused more on how can we get people back into their communities, back reunited with their families, having a meaningful job, having meaningful relationships, having things to do in the community? So obviously I'm more for the back in the community.
I think it's a very reasonable point in wanting to balance and maintain the person's sense of identity, and not only identity, but sense or semblance of routine in the midst of something very significant happening to them. And one of the things that I often talk about with people that I'm working with or people that I'm working with is not pathologizing the person or their personality. Like, what out of how they're thinking, how they're feeling, how they're responding is actually them and not an entity that needs to be structured into a diagnosis and a treatment. So I'm very much about collaboration, least restrictive across the board, and also using the person as an expert in themselves rather than this horde of professionals coming in and making statements about the person. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to open up the questions to the participants. So if there's anything in particular you would like to ask Oryx, Amit, or myself, please feel free to raise your hand or to type a question in the chat.
Tara, Oryx and Amit, we have a question in the chat already. Sorry, I don't know your name. Number 0006. Would you like to? Hello, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. My name's Antonia and I know Amit. Hello, Amit. I guess my question is, I firmly agree and support. I find myself nodding to a lot of the comments that you're making, Oryx, and it's really refreshing to hear. I guess my problem or question and worry is that living here in Australia, it's very Western and it's very individualized, as is our medical system, as is, you know, our lifestyle, really. So how do we bring about change so that we start to build the village and the community that wraps itself around people, so that there are those natural forms of support that will assist people in the long term? Because at the moment, I think that is one of the issues. And I really loved your comment about paid relationships, because that really does describe quite clearly the talking therapies. I think there's a place for that for sure, but there is something quite significant that's missing from particularly Western worlds, I think, in the death of relationships. And that for me is really significant to being able to move forward and make a great change in this area for people who are experiencing things differently to the norm, I guess. So, yeah, if you can find a question in there to respond to.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think what I'm hearing is how do you build community for folks, and yeah, I think it's a process, and I'm not embedded in Australian culture, but I think we share some of the Western culture and individualism and that. So it can be, I think, more of a challenge in places like that to build community, but not impossible if folks are intentional about it. You know, doing events like this, doing live events like this, anything to bring people together. I mean, there's all kinds of ideas to be able to start to build community, starting a book club, hosting film nights, and then that can evolve into different groups that want to meet regularly, support each other, activities together. I don't know. Yeah, you're not alone in that. I think the sense of community is being stripped in a lot of different places, And how do you build up that sense of community? Well, there's models for that. You know, we're losing bowling clubs, and you know, I'm a basketball player, so open gym basketball, going to the exercise club. Um, there's just so many ways to build community. You can build community around shared experience, you know, disgruntled mental health workers joining ISPS. That's a community. So, um, lots of different ways.
Thank you. And Amanda, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Tara. And thanks, Antonio. It's a really great question. I feel compelled to respond from my own lived experience of getting to a place where I had lost connection with family, with all the people that were important to me in my life. And it's a very, very difficult place to land. And to find a way forward, I can only share of my own experience, personal experience. It was a process. It was a process of really leaning on those support workers that I had at first. And I guess I think I might have done all the talk therapies that were offered to me, you know, ABC, DBT, BBC, whatever, give it to me. Because I was getting a source of connection. I was building a community. It was part of my identity. I was a mad person, and that's what you do. But I was also starting to meet peers, and I was meeting lots of peers, not just in hospital, you know, the Triple C, the, you know, coffee, ciggies and commiserations in the, back in the day when you could smoke in a mental health unit. But I think it was, how could I move out? How could I move out of that and find peers that weren't just in hospital, but that were actually out in community, doing their thing, and connecting with those peers, you know, sitting on committees, you know, giving my few cents worth about what was wrong with the hospital. Back in the day, you know, that gave me a bit of solidarity when I connected with those peers. So I might have lost family, I might have lost a lot of friends in the process of my extreme states. And I had to learn how to be different. And after a while, being a consumer and doing those things, connecting with those communities wasn't working for me anymore. And but it was like a launch pad. And for me, I wanted to get out of mental health services. So I wanted to break those connections, you know, with my psychologist and those paid talk therapies, those relationships, because I always used to think, oh, but you're only here because you're paid to be. I'd rather hang out with my peers who weren't paid to be with me. And we started to build community amongst ourselves. And yeah, sure, that doesn't mean that grief and loss that came from losing those connections that I once cherished and loved. I still have tsunamis of grief wash over me for what I've lost. But I also now am in a place where I have regained my independence, and I have built a community around me that sustains me. You know, I've started to build my new family, maybe family of choice rather than family by, you know, blood. So I just want to say it's not easy, but it is possible. And I think we just have to hold on to that for the people with whom we work alongside, that it is possible to build your own community after having these extreme states and going through periods of great grief and loss.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Amanda. I just had a thought for an idea for a path to community. So for many of us, it's based on our interests. So if you're working with someone, explore, get to know them. What are they passionate about? Part of it could be, you know, they're passionate about peer work, or they're, you know, like Amanda, you found your community in the with peer workers. So okay, well let's connect you with other peer workers. Could be in person, it could be online, right? Part of it could be I really like surfing. I want to get back into surfing. Okay, well, support the person in doing that, and there's a whole community of surfers out there, right? So for me, it's basketball. So if you don't know, I played basketball in college, and now I'm huge into basketball coaching. There's a whole community there. At one point it was golfing. Not golfing as much anymore, but a whole community of golfers. So that's an idea, is explore people's interests, and then that can lead to community for them.
Thank you. And Ella, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I've got 3 questions, but if you're brief answering, then hopefully it'll shut it down. One is, Emmett, is the cost of antipsychotic drugs, maintaining someone on that for a month, I heard, was like over $1,000. Is that still the case? So that's one question. And how long do people tend to stay on it? Just something very quick and practical. The other one is Oryx. I have heard some of those older studies have been quite dismissed by psychologists and other people because they use the old style drugs, and they say, oh, no, but they were older drugs and they worked differently and they gave the doses were too high. So they kind of invalidate all of those early research, which is most of the research. And they said, can't you get modern studies? And so I'm actually looking for modern studies. So there's just a quick answer on that, if you could, or maybe I could write to you about it, because I've got a bunch of reasons for wanting that. And then my third question, sorry, this is rather a lot, but don't do this every day, so I make the most of it. I had heard years ago there was a rumor that the open dialogue practice or protocol of not giving antipsychotic drugs for 3 weeks, and after that time most people didn't get them. I heard this rumor that was actually breaking down and that they were giving it sooner now, and that answer might come from someone in the watchers and the listeners rather than the people who are the identified presenters. So those are my 3 questions. If that's too much, we'll just take one of them and give someone else a chance. There we go.
I think the first question, I mean, I'm not exactly sure when you say $1,000 a month. I mean, are you talking about the Australian context? I mean, most antipsychotics, all antipsychotics, are on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. So while they might cost the government the money, they're definitely not costing the patient that much. So there's a cap of $30 for every script. So that's the pharmaceutical benefit scheme.
No, it is the cost to the government that interests me, because if it is, that was like about 10, 15 years ago that someone said, a psychiatrist told me it cost that much. I thought, well, that's a lot of support that someone could be getting for that. So I was just curious to know what it costs.
Not every medication is that. I think some of the injections are about $300, or an injection, or I mean, the clozapine system, I cannot say for sure, but most of the oral medications are much cheaper. So yeah, some of the depot injections might be costly, but I wouldn't say $1,000. I think that's I don't remember any drug that is that costly, but I might be wrong.
Well, thank you.
I don't think if it was that costly, then I possibly would have known.
Okay, thank you. I think they were saying it's sometimes because they're on more than one drug, like mood stabilizers and other things as well.
Well, that is a problem. I don't think most people require polypharmacy. Most people do not require polypharmacy. Unfortunately, the algorithms, that's a complex issue. Yeah, it's again, that's about good practice and better practice, and advocating for least restrictive treatment, least minimum effective doses, etc.
Okay, thank you, because that's obviously some misinformation. Well, not obviously, but yeah, I'll sort of can that one as something that was in my mind for a long time. Thank you.
Thanks. Welcome.
Well, I'm wondering if you would want to just give us a reminder about question 2 and question 3.
Oh yes, the other one was on the 3 weeks on open dialogue protocol that was established, back in the 80s. And then this rumor that it had been breaking down. And I was wondering if the new open dialogue that is setting up in various parts of the world, if they hold to that 3 weeks protocol as best they can, because that's sort of, for me, a little bit of a inspiration that if it's breaking down, I guess I'd like to know.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on open dialogue, so I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that question. I would like to address the question of these studies, quote unquote, being invalidated because these are old medication. That is a classic argument by the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry to try to invalidate. Of course, they would want to invalidate studies that don't make them look so hot. So I personally, I don't. I think that there's so much consistency. If you look at studies, these are older studies, yes, but then if you look at newer studies, you're going to get the same type of results that people do. Basically, people do better without medication. And you're having this similar number pops up. 2/3 of folks recover, as compared to places where they're heavy duty medication. It's more 1/3. And I think a big part of the problem is how we look at what is actually happening with the person. There have been books written that basically invalidate the chemical imbalance theory. So the medications are based on a chemical imbalance theory, that there's something going on with someone's brain chemistry, and these drugs somehow fix that brain chemistry. That has been invalidated, has been supported by psychiatrists in medical journals, that this theory is not correct, but it's still out there because of marketing. Marketing. It's a lot of money behind marketing and commercials that suggest, and they always say it could be related to an imbalance in such and such neurotransmitters or whatever. It could be, but we know it's not. There's actually, the more recent research, we have disproven the chemical imbalance theory. So yeah. So there's going to be always a lot of effort in the pharmaceutical industry to discredit. But yeah, there's just so much
Yeah.
overwhelming
Thank-
evidence.
thank
Even the newer evidence is, yeah, very much questions the validity of the current model.
Yeah, thank you. Are there many recent studies, or it's just too hard to do such a study? That's is there anything?
There's studies coming out all the time. I just chose to focus on those because those are pretty famous ones and pretty clear, in my mind, pretty clear results.
So how do you find the recent ones? Because I sort of need to find them.
Yeah, just research. I wish I had a better answer for you. You can, there's books coming out all the time. Yeah, there's websites. So I'm happy to get you some resources. I didn't prepare those for this particular.
That's okay. Can I email you?
Sure.
In a couple of weeks. Can't do it right now. Yeah, thank you. Just to finish, I think for me, when I answer that criticism, I say, well, look, the basic purpose of it is tranquilizing. The person is tranquilized. It doesn't matter kind of how they're tranquilized. They're tranquilized. You know, that's what those drugs are. So that's sort of, I don't know, that's my answer too. But yeah, anyway, thank you for
I
that.
think it's a bit more complex than that. I mean, look, we need to differentiate between treatment for what we are calling psychosis, or or versus more common problems like depression. Now, the chemical imbalance theory, a lot of talk, especially exactly that terminology, and the criticism of that terminology has been more in relation to the SSRIs and depression in the last 12, 18 months. The issue around antipsychotics is possibly a bit more nuanced in the sense that there are some differences between various classes of what we call antipsychotics. And while the older ones were mostly what you say tranquilizers, then I have to say that something like clozapine can make a significant difference in the way people think, or for the better in most parts. If people are suffering from delusions and hallucinations, and the judgments awry, and it is not helping them sort of live the best quality of life, it can make a profound difference. But it's a very difficult medication to take, as we know. So each one, and there have been 2 or 3 or new antipsychotics in the market in Australia. Australia is a very small portion of the world pharmaceutical market, and some of the new drugs don't come to Australia. So, but yeah, it's a tricky one. The chemical imbalance. I don't know, Oryx, whether he was referring to antipsychotics per se. Look, we could always debate about what is psychosis, and yeah, but as Oryx has also acknowledged that for minimal use of medication is sometimes necessary, essential, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I'm talking about for chemical imbalance. I'm talking for any diagnosis. There's no. And again, my understanding, and I could point to research studies by psychiatrists, that the chemical imbalance theory has basically been disproven. Like there's no chemical imbalance for depression, there's no chemical imbalance for schizophrenia, there's no so it's the myth is that this drug is correcting some chemical imbalance that is not happening. There may be something happening in terms of, or there is something happening with these drugs because they're psychoactive substances, so they're having an effect on your brain, which, and by the way, also very individual, because some people take a certain drug and it has a desired effect. It has, it's helpful for them. Some people take the exact same drug and they have a horrible reaction to that drug. So I just think we have to have a more honest conversation about what these drugs are. They are just, and again, it's a simplification, but they may be a heavy tranquilizer, right? They may be really suppressing your system. They might be a stimulant to the system. So those are the basic effects of these drugs. Is you're trying to suppress part of the system, maybe quiet someone's voices or something like that, or you're trying to stimulate certain parts of someone's system. So, for example, someone who's severely depressed now has a little bit more energy or something like that. So, but chemical imbalances have never been found. There's no magic thing that corrects a chemical imbalance. And if you can find that research, send it my way, because my understanding has basically been that the chemical imbalance theory is disproven at this point.
A comment that I would like to make about the use of medications is touching on your point around the same medication can be given to two people with two very, very different responses. And what I'm hoping the medical world is starting to lean towards or to make accessible is the idea of, and I don't think I'll get the name right, but like genetic testing for metabolizing. So if medications are required, we can tell through a blood test what class or type of medications that individual is more likely to have less side effects and more of a positive and immediate response to than others, for example. That's definitely my hope for the future. All right, so we have a couple of comments in the chat. So one of which is a reflection by Antonia, which is what do people do? What do you do if there isn't a village or community for the person or carers to support their return to their baseline functioning or to support recovery?
Yeah, well, it takes a village. So I remember I actually got to see Lauren Mosher present on Soteria, and he talked a lot about these types of things. He was a psychiatrist. He passed away. So he didn't know what to think when he started this Soteria research, but he was someone who had a lot of integrity, and he went with the research, even though the research was probably surprising to a lot of psychiatrists. Again, they were hoping for different results, that the hospitals would have a better outcome than this non-professional soteria, which was basically staffed by college students with no professional training. And here you have, and no medications, or very limited medications. And now you have this soteria doing better than the hospitals. And he ended up quitting. He had a very high position in psychiatric, like clinical director in the APA. Like he was way up there. And then he got cast aside because he stuck by what the research said. He got kicked out of psychiatry. So what he said in this talk was, when do you need medication? When there's not enough community. So again, I mean, it gets back to the community conversation. I can't answer that for you. But it's I would say probably a priority. If it's not there, if their only relationships are their professionals, and there's not many options in the community, then yeah, medication might be the only option, right? Or having someone in a very secluded environment. Well, by the way, a lot of us with lived experience say we'd rather be lock us up and don't medicate us. It's almost worse being completely over medicated. So if you're going to do something to try to keep us safe, then just lock the door. But you know, preferred. Am I right, Amanda? Like preferred, being in jail and not medicated than in a hospital where you're basically in jail anyways because you can't leave, and now you've got all these heavy duty meds to deal with too.
Yeah, and it's often referred to as, as that chemical restraint.
Yeah.
That we're up against. There's a question in the chat, Oryx, from Begonia, about, once you're in the system of medication, and you've been hurt by it, how do you escape it? Begonia, did you want to add anything more? I see you've got your camera on now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Ernest, and everybody else. My experiences as a family member, I haven't had direct experiences. And what I can see is my son being hurt. And I've been very close to him, obviously, all his life. So I know what has been going on for the last 8 to 10 years. And how is he now? He is completely a different person, physically, mentally, and everything. And really, in the family, we believe that the medication has taken a very important part of making him unwell in many other ways, and not really helping him. And he suffers a lot with different things, not helping him with these experiences that at times are very tormentors to him. And he tried in the past to stop the medication, and he was put into compulsory medication. And now he would like to stop and to decrease. But who helps, and how you escape now? I don't know. Anybody, any ideas?
Well, I know how I done it, but
Okay.
I that's all I can share from my own experience, and it wasn't easy. I think getting to a point where recognizing I was getting sicker. I was caught in that, and then asking for help to get out of that. There just wasn't that support around. I had to just sort of keep looking, and I was fortunate to find a really good GP who helped me over a number of years to slowly come off. So I know that it's being talked about more often now, that there isn't that support to come off it. I'd like to put that message out. It is possible. However, I also know just how difficult it can be, and there can be a lot of side effects that can happen through that process. And my story, is not, is only one story. But I'd be curious to hear Amit's response to this one around what kind of support is there for people here in Australia wanting to come off medication, psychiatric medication, that you're aware of.
Look, there are a small minority of people spread across the country, who are part of the critical psychiatry web list. Melissa Raven is here. She might be, I know she's not clinical, but she may be able to comment on the details. But I mean, it's difficult to find someone who will sort of go the journey with you. There's no substitute for advocacy and sort of really sort of knocking the doors of the system again and again, I suppose. And I suppose there is the need to build up a community of psychiatrists who would be willing to do this work. It's not easy. It's about taking positive risks, and there needs to be a bit of an atmosphere and appetite. I mean, I think the legal system really gets in the way. And as I said, people here in Australia will be familiar with the incident in Sydney, where someone who had the diagnosis, then was untreated for a while, and then just went and stabbed people in the shopping mall. And that kind of thing just sets us back a lot. And I posed this question in my group. Melissa may remember that. What rehab did that person get? He did reduce his medication with his private psychiatrist in a planned manner, I think 2014 to 2019. But then, the incident happened a few months back. So it's very difficult to predict, but if people have come off the medication, they still need to be within the system. And I've asked this question. I know. It's not my. I don't know. I use the chat to ask the question to Oryx just in case, if there is time. But I think the whole issue about meaning and purpose in life is central. So these are very philosophical core questions about being human, about being humanity, about our humanity. The person has this episode and altered mental state and whatever. In most people, it is waxing and waning. And then during those intervening periods, how can we help them then? I mean, Oryx has found his niche in empowerment, and that's good. But some people may just need a little bit of work or a bit of a leg up in things that interest them, and that seems to be missing. I think increasingly the services are paying lip service to rehabilitation, and hence I bring up the question of rehabilitation in ISPS because that was one of my interests in sort of joining ISPS and being on the board of directors too. That if we're talking about social and psychological approaches, then definitely psychosocial rehabilitation should be in there. Anyway, so I've digressed from the question, but as far as medication reduction is concerned, I think we need to build up a body of people who are ready to do the work, and we need more acceptance from the mainstream that, for respect for personal autonomy and for people to choose what they want to do.
Thanks.
Sorry, but while you are talking, I'm mindful that you've also got 2 additional questions that you put in the chat. So one about the use of the word rehabilitation, and another about the US mental health system in the community and how that model looks and works.
Yeah, I thought Oryx might be able to give us a bird's eye view of, because my impression is that it is more office-based in the US, but then I'm not very sure, not very sure about how whatever we call here, the public mental health services here, I suppose it's very state-based, how they work. And yeah, Oryx's view on that. And yeah, just about rehabilitation, or, about, let's say, broadening that to say finding meaning and purpose. How can we put that front and center? Or how do you put that front and center in the work that you do?
Okay. All right, it's early here, so let's start with the first one, and then I can try to get to the second one too. So the great US of A, if you have a lot of money, then you can pick and choose who you see. You can spend a lot of money on your mental health care. You can do research, so there's a big difference between the private mental health system and public. So if you don't have a lot of money and you're thrust into the public mental health system, then you basically get who you're assigned to work with. Not as many choices. So yeah, I'm not in that world a lot. I just hear stories, and I try to keep myself as up to speed as possible. So yeah, people go, have a psychiatrist that they see, if things start to break down, then try to find room in inpatient facilities, where people are given a team of workers, social worker, psychiatrists, psychologists, occupational therapists, but all very much based in a medical model. And then outside of that, you have our peer movement. You have our recovery movement. My organization's actually funded by the government, as a national peer organization. Federal government.
That's great.
And then states have their own peer-run organizations, oftentimes funded by the state government. So we have a peer movement that is funded. So I think that's a bit of a difference from some other countries, where it's a little harder to get feet in the ground without funding.
We can only dream of it here, Oryx.
Yeah, so that's a benefit. we're talking peanuts compared to the clinical system in terms of funding, but at least we have some organizations, we have some funding, and we get to speak our minds at events like this, and we're having an impact.
Do you get some backlash from the mainstream, from the APA and stuff like that?
Well, we try to be very careful and very respectful, and I'm probably being more radical than I would be in a meeting with with professionals in the US, because this is Australia, and I don't think you're gonna come back and say, hey, that guy said this. Plus it's ISPS, so hopefully we're on the same page. But yeah, sometimes you have to be diplomatic and careful, and you got to know your audience. So try to be pretty good at that. So no, we haven't gotten in too much trouble, so that's good.
But the basic message about less medication, no polypharmacy, not sort of restricting people's rights, not throwing them on the scrap heap, and that's the image. I mean, that's a bad generalization, but essentially, the issue about insurance, and if you don't have insurance, then you're really disadvantaged, that kind of stuff, and did she see these stories on homeless people, and it's really it's sad, and I mean, is it just the media creating that image that it's worse in the US, or it's just about the same? I mean, here, for example, do you get these bad news, like these stories? Oh, people waiting in ED and such a demand. You get them in the papers periodically. Haven't heard from the US.
Sometimes, yeah, I would. There are situations where people really want to get into a hospital, they're not able to get into a hospital for whatever reason. Then something bad happens. The media likes to showcase the worst situation, and then they don't talk so much about the people who don't want to be in a hospital and then are in a hospital and have a bad situation in the hospital. Those stories don't get out as much, but they're very common as well. Oh, was there a second part to the question?
Just your thoughts about rehabilitation and meaning and purpose.
Rehabilitation and meaning and purpose?
I'm sort of coalescing the two. I mean, psychiatric rehabilitation is supposed to be an authentic sort of subdivision. Tara would know. While I'm sort of broadly saying all of us need meaning and purpose.
Yeah, no, I mean, overall, I'm a fan of psych rehab. I mean, I think it's done a lot of good things for folks because, yeah, like you said, it's focused on more the meaning and purpose and what does someone want to do with their lives, getting them back into their work and such. So, yeah, I think it's overall a good model.
Alrighty, everybody. I'm just mindful of the time and that we need to start wrapping up. The later on it's getting in, Oryx's Day, the later on it's getting in on our evening. So I would like to give a huge special thanks for our international guest speaker, Oryx Cohen, and thanks again, excuse me, to the Western Australia Recovery College Alliance for sponsoring this event. We do have some information that's been shared in the chat about the National Empowerment Centre, which is Oryx's organisation, and also, if you're interested, how to become a member for ISPS Australia as well. So I'd like to invite everybody to either give a little clap or share the clap reaction in the chat for Oryx's time, for Armit's time, and for all of you joining us this evening as well. These events are not the same without your attendance, so thank you so much for your time on a Wednesday evening. And for those who have registered for the training today, we will also send out a recording link to tonight's discussions for your interest, and for those who couldn't make it in person tonight as well. So thank you again, and winding up with saying a huge thank you from over the other side of the world, Oryx.
I will say enjoy your evening. I know it's getting late there, and I'm just getting started. So.
All right. Thank you, and thanks for all the attendees again. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you all. Thank you,
you.
Tara, for hosting. And I hope, carers and those who have had experience of psychosis and those who have lived experience have benefited from the discussion. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
I've appreciated being a fly on the wall. I couldn't get a word in edgeways, but I had plenty of things to say. But as Oryx said, he was going to put in his 2 cents worth, but in Australia, 2 cents is rounded down to nothing, so it wouldn't have counted for anything.
Good night.
See ya.
See ya.
Talk later, Mandy.
Yep.
Amanda.
Stop record. Oh, there it is.